show. How'd you like that?
The faith that the dark past has taught us.
Such an amazing, amazing document. Who knew that Ted Lang from The Love Boat was so political, right? That's a whole nother version of Ted Lang. So we're going to sit here and talk a little bit about the film for about 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to take questions from the audience as well. So we're going to include you into the discussion. I have two really impressive gentlemen with me tonight. Right here next to me is a legend, filmmaker, playwright, songwriter, musician, raconteur, Melvin Van Peebles. Over here is a friend of mine. I've known him many, many years. We started together at the Village Voice as writers. He's written amazing essays from John Michel Basquiat all the way to Miles Davis. He's covered the entire spectrum of black culture. And after years of being a writer, he's become an excellent band leader, has a band, an orchestra, the Burnt Sugar Orchestra, plays around the globe, Mr. Greg Tate. So I kind of want to start I said a little bit at the beginning of the night, a little bit about the film. I want to give a little bit more context for those of you who aren't familiar. The film, again, was shot in August of 1972. It was the 7th anniversary of the 65 Watts riots. So it was, now you wonder, Stax Records was notorious, it's known, connected to Memphis, Tennessee. And that's where the home base is. But Al Bell, who was then president of Stax, you see him in the shot early with Jesse Jackson standing to his right. Al was a very politically active black man, and he took the weight and power of Stax and tried to weld it as a political tool. He was very supportive of Jesse and Operation Push. And so he organized this event to both celebrate the riot and also, in a sense, to the commitment of Stax Records and his company to the black community in Los Angeles. The tickets for that day were $1. So it was very much, you see the place was packed. So it was very much a whole family of black LA was invited to the event. The film ultimately came out initially in, I think, February of '73. It was very successful. It got a Golden Globe nomination. And if you look back to the era, it's one of the best documents, I think, of the black community that you're going to see. Because what they did, after they did the concert film, the director, Mel Stewart, felt like he needed to add more context. So he went out and talked to brothers on the corner. You can tell they went to bars. They went to car repair shops. They went to places where brothers were hanging out. They went to beauty shops. And you can see it's a very grassroots feel. And then you add on Richard Pryor, which is another level of grassroots. And it's one of the best kind of documents of where we were as a black community at that moment. I also, before we get to this, I just want to throw a little commercial in for another film that covers the same period from a completely different angle. And that is Today, Free Angela and All Political Prisoners. It's a fantastic document. And what's interesting is that this concert was happening during the time of that trial that's in the film. So it's a really great moment you see this film, as you can see the Free Angela. It's an amazing document of where we were as a people at a particular time. And I say something, when you watch this film and you watch, we showed Save the Children earlier in the series, which was shot about the same time. The early 70s was an amazing time in our community. The music that was going on, unbelievably diverse, mastery, people expanding the vocabulary of what black music was, both in terms of commercial artists who expanded the vocabulary, not just simply people who were doing avant-garde work. What Isaac Hayes was doing with his arrangements alone, that's just one example. One more person I want to talk about before we get to our fine guest here, Rufus Thomas. Okay, those of you who don't know, Rufus is from Memphis. Rufus started on one of the first really great black radio station, WDIA in Memphis, Tennessee. So he was a radio announcer starting in the 50s, along with a guy named Nat D. Williams, who were two of the first superstar black radio DJs. He then went on and began recording. He recorded for the same label as Elvis, which was Sun Records. And he always did records involving animals. He had, I think one of his hits in the 50s was Bearcat or something like that. So he always did animal stuff. And then as those who may know, he had the Funky Penguin, the Funky Chicken. He had the Penguin. There was a penguin dance, right? And he just was the funkiest brother around. And I don't know how old he was there, but he was rocking, you know. So I have to give a special shout out to Rufus Thomas, an amazing, amazing artist. So I want to start with you, Greg. I don't know when the last time you saw the film. What reaction did you have now watching it now after many years?
I felt like I was looking at alchemy, like the transmutation of black fire into black gold, you know, because you think about what had happened in Watts kind of 7 years before then. You think about what happened in terms of the rise of black power movement, black nationalism, and it makes you realize the importance of like a people having a philosophy, a community having a philosophy that translates into every aspect of their being, you know, and here you see it in this very presentational way, you see it in this very expressive musical way, but then as well with the interviews, you know, the grassroots interviews, I mean, you really get to see the degree to which at that point in the community, I mean, people had grabbed hold of this idea of being a community, of being a people, you know, and the way it permeated their thought about not just kind of, you know, what they were going to wear, how they were going to wear their hair, but, you know, to like really significant areas of intimacy, you know, with love, you know, with partnership, family, all these kinds of things. I mean, it was a rarefied moment that because we're in America, it was not a moment that was going to be easy to sustain the way, say, if you're going to, you know, a culture that has like a grounding religion, you know, like Islam, you know, other places, or Catholicism, you know, in other places, or communism, you know what I mean? So for us, the expression of a national consciousness was going to come through in these very personal ways, but then as well within the connection that the music allowed to kind of permeate, you know, on a spiritual level, you know, the folks. So all those kind of things were just going through my mind, you know, I was watching it. And then, but I, you know, like by the time we got to the end, I was just thinking like, man, I need a Wattstax app. You know, it's like, you know, because that's like, it's the thing that you feel more than anything, like from beginning to end is just like, just the wave, the energy of love, you know, that's just circulating, you know, and it's still, you know, it's circulate. You can feel it circulate in this room, you know what I mean? Just like, wow, it's not just a whole bunch of black people together checking out a concert, you know, but you're feeling the degree to which, yeah, there's this love for self, love for, you know, who you are in the context of America, given our history and all of that, love for the culture as it's being expressed, but just love for one another, being there in the same place, having, you know, sharing these moments with each other too, you know.
You know, it struck me, and this is going to be a great segue into Melvin, is, you know, the moment when the people come on the crowd, they're dancing to Rufus and they take over the field.
Yeah, pivotal. Yeah.
And how easily he's able to get them to walk off the field.
Yeah, right.
And I was thinking, could that happen now?
Yeah.
I mean, I just thought, wow, they responded to him so intimately, and he spoke to them in a beautiful way.
Yeah,
There was a sweetness. I mean, there was also an authority that was in there.
But I mean, that epitomizes what I'm talking about, where it's like the community wanted to see itself represented to its best, to itself. You know, because one thing you're very conscious of is the fact that there's no cops in the space. You know, they come in with Isaac. You know what I mean? But you're just very aware that this is a moment that people have come together to be their best among one another. So, you know, when Rufus says that, it's the most natural thing. Oh, okay, all right, yeah, we're gonna respect the space. And it's an interesting moment to contrast with that moment in the film The Night James Brown Saved Boston,
right,
where the young brothers come up on stage and he has a whole conversation. And he says, like, you're disrespecting me. You know what I mean? It's a really tense moment, you know, even his engagement with them. Whereas in this case, you know, you were seeing when he tells them go get the brother off the off the field. You know, it was like the children's crusade. You know what I mean? They just rose up, boom, come on. You know, it was like 100 Sandmen took the stage and whisked my man to the wings. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It was beautiful.
Hey, Melvin, do you have a mic over there, Melvin?
He does.
I do.
He does.
Okay. Well, Melvin is uniting. He's on stage. Melvin, you see him throughout the entire day. So I want to put a little context. Melvin was already, a famous filmmaker at the time of this film. Sweetback has come out the year before, am I correct?
Well, that's very interesting in itself. I was on a record label. I was on A&M Records, and when I made Sweetback, my secretary was kicking the boots with some guys who had a group, and I needed the music. And she says, "Why don't you see my friend?" And so I saw his friends, and there were about 20 of them living in one room, starving to death, etc. And but they were enormously good musicians, and I'd written the music and told them they'd never been inside a studio for music, and so even though they've done a lot of good music around, so they didn't give me any grief, and they just played what I told them, and it became their first record. That was Sweetback's badass song. The music is played by Earth, Wind, and Fire. Now, after I'd gotten thrown out of one label, the only label that would take me, unless Motown might have come along, there were only two really big black record labels, but they were trying to influence, they were trying to break the color barrier, etc. But Stax Records say, hey, they left the shit down. You understand what I mean? Stax Records was the real deal. And Al Bell took Sweetback. What happened after Al Bell and the album was so successful, what happened was that came Shaft. And since the album had been so successful, even though the Hollywood record company had a film company had its own record label, they went to Stax, and that's how Stax moved into the movie business, and that's what happened.
So how did you end up? So you're doing security at this concert. How did you end up doing that?
What happened when Stax had the guts and the idea to do this this concert, they needed somebody who really knew the technical aspects of it, and because of my theatrical, et cetera, somebody he could trust, that was me. And then there are a few funny stories I'll tell you, but when they got the stadium and everything, but the film crew was a film crew. They didn't really know how to set up other things. And I took my boys from Broadway, and that's what we did. And then a couple of days before the show, I had a meeting, said, okay, now what's our weakest part? And they said, security. And well, that's my middle name. I'm from south side of Chicago. So what I did was I said, okay, we'll get police, and also we'll get karate. Get a bunch of karate guys so that if there was trouble, there wouldn't be any gunplay. So the
How many karate guys did you have? How many karate guys did you get?
Well, let me get to that.
Okay.
The first thing I get there, and for police, they had hired old police who had all retired. By the time the national anthem was played, everybody was asleep. I'm telling you, if I'm lying, I'm flying. And for my karate gang, the boys, they went to a karate school. Nobody there was over 16. Now, even if you could kick a big guy's ass, if he's with his girlfriend, and he said, sit down, mister, you're going to be in trouble. You can't have that embarrassment. So I was a little short of help. Just jump a little further. When Rufus told the people to come on stage, come on in, and the people started running, I had to go up. That part you don't see. Say, whoa, bro, because there's electricity under the field. There's a huge amount of watts of electricity for the lights on the both sides. So you're going to have these people electrocuted, huh? And so that's when we got the people off. But still, there are other people climbing. And one of the funny things, I had my bodyguard, who's one of the young men from the karate school. And when the people kept climbing up, I pulled out my gun from my sack, and my bodyguard fainted. So what do you think I had in here, man? Lollipops? The bodyguard fainted. Whoa! Huh? However, some guy comes running to me, the lady says, hey. And that's a different story. The Bloods and the other group.
The Crips.
Huh? Yeah, the Bloods and the Crips used to be together. They used to be together, and the police managed to kill off from the younger people and put these two people, so these two groups started to fight each other. But when the Panthers, this was the time when they were giving Angela and this and the other, when they were having, it was a thing to make the Bloods and the Crips, who used to be one. And anyways, the Bloods and the Crips were going to have a shootout at there at the stadium.
Oh, supposedly that night.
Huh?
That night of the show?
Yeah, that night of the show. And so, okay. So I couldn't have that. And I told my crew, don't move until I get back. And me and my little sack with my gun and so forth, I'm going over there. And everybody else got very busy except two bodyguards from Johnny Taylor's bodyguards said, we'll go with you, man. And I knew how to talk to the guys. Now, if I went over and I said, I'm going to kill you, that's one thing. But I went over and used the other language. I said, are we going to all have to get killed here today? Because if you say, I'm going to kill you, then that's a challenge. But if you admit that you lose in the shootout, they calm down. The next time they had the festival, everybody, there were a couple of deaths. But it was very interesting, very wonderful, exactly what he was saying, the warmth of the people. And the man in himself, he got an attitude because I guess he thought it was going to be a raggedy thing. And it was phenomenal. And from where I'm sitting, the lights were right, the sound was right, and nobody got killed.
There's so many things that resonate for me with the film. One of the things, I've been working on a book about Soul Train, and one of the things I realized watching the film was, if you look at the first year of Soul Train, first 2 years, particularly when he was just starting out, Stax was a big supporter of Soul Train. So almost all those artists that you saw tonight who were on that show were in the early episodes of Soul Train. And it was also interesting, not to diss anybody, but Motown took a more conservative view. And you did not see Stevie, Deanna, the big guns on Motown did not go on Soul Train until like after Soul Train had proven itself. Al Bell, being very political, was very big supporter of Don Cornelius. So that's just one idea. The other thing is, I have in my bedroom the Public Enemy poster for the first album. And if you look at it says, freedom is a road seldom traveled by the multitude. I had no idea that comes from the saxophone player in the Barcades. He said that tonight, and that's the exact sample, I believe, that Chuck D took.
Yeah, I mean, there's easily like 5 samples that I know from like 80s and 90s hip hop that came off the Wattstax album. You know, like, I mean, I'm not gonna get all nerdy.
Get into it. Tell me a couple more.
No. Well, Son of Shaft.
Son of Shaft.
You know, is in it's one of the tunes off of Takes a Nation of Millions. I'm forgetting which one right now. Definitely the Freedom is a Road thing, and then the way Jesse's brothers and sisters,
right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, that's at the top of.
Brothers and sisters, know what's happening? Come on, anybody know the sample? Come on. Is it Fight the Power?
No. It's man. See, this is like
Come on, come on. I know your hip hop head knows where
it
that sample comes
in,
from.
you know.
Is it Fight the Power?
No, it's
I think it's
there
Rebel Without a
you
Pause. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, watching
Yeah, I got it now.
watching the movie, I mean, the echoes of what happened with hip hop in the '80s, and that is so much in this film in terms of anybody who was using like PE, anybody who had political consciousness. This is the thing that gravitated to Wattstax because it had that mix of politics and funk. I mean, watching the Barkays, my man was his process. Right next to the guy with the blonde wig. Whoa. I mean, I just thought that they were, I mean, that was actually a revelation to me, again, having not seen it in a while, how intense that band was. And how Barkays are one of the underrated, funk bands. They didn't really, because they never really, they had nothing even vaguely like a crossover hit. They were totally gut bucket black.
Yo, even though you know that, I'm like with Vernon and some other folks founders of Black Rock Coalition, but, that term Black Rock was the name of a Barkays album, like a very undersung Black Barkays album that came out around 1971. You know what I mean? It was really a template, I think for a lot of things that Funkadelic and other people did later. But it was one of those things where they were just ahead of the curve,
Yes.
and nobody knew what to do with it. But if you go back and look at that album, because you can get it at Amazon now, I mean, they look like Funkadelic looked like a year later, or Parliament looked a year later, man. Yeah.
I was always thinking about, there's a record, Holy Ghost, by them, that is one of the funkiest things ever. And they were balancing at that time when you still had gospel soul music, which was still dealing with the secular versus the religious, but in a funk context. Because you think of funk, we think of funk as going more futuristic. They seemed like Barkays were on that line. They had the soul tradition, but they were pushing it forward. And you watch them tonight, and the wah-wah guitar and the musicianship of that band.
I can tell you the audience, everybody, there were two things. It was great, but also you never thought you'd see that greatness out there out loud. You know what I mean? And the love and the strength and everything was just, for even the guy who came out and wouldn't get off the stage and everybody got out, nobody beat him up. Do you know what I mean? It was just, wow, this is us. It was really terrific.
How much? So, this is all one day, the concert.
Yes.
When did they shoot this? Do you know when they shot the other material, like all of these? When was that done?
That was at a certain stage of the game. They felt they should add other things to it. That was done over, I say, about a 3-month period. And then they did one set with Richard, by putting it in various sections, he seemed like he was all over the place, and some of the other people were the same.
Yeah, I also thought, I was thinking about a couple of other musical things that really stuck out. And, going back to the beginning of the film, where you have the gospel section. And where do you see concerts today where the entire spectrum of the black music experience is in one place? It wasn't seen as separation. You had the great Albert King playing a set. You had Staples who walked the borderline of both sides. And then you had some Rance Allen who also kind of walked that borderline between both sides. And so when you look at this year, 72, soul music is still a viable part of our culture. But new trains, like what's going on with Isaac and the longer kind of tracks, that suddenly they're making the records longer, which begins to lead into what we eventually call both funk and disco is going on. So I think I'm always struck now when I watch films from that particular period is the unification, going back to our original idea, that you could have a show where the entire family could go to a black music show. They're playing hit records in the show, but they're also giving you the entire experience. There are none of these separations that we have now. Generationally, there were grandparents in that crowd, and there were kids in the crowd, and everyone was there listening to and it's hard to imagine now us doing a contemporary show today where everyone would feel comfortable bringing all aspects of the black community together.
Yeah. Well, I remember I was having a conversation with Questlove from The Roots a couple of years ago, and I was telling him, I said, I said, yo, man, when I was coming up in D.C., every week you would go see a bill that would be just this incredible mixture of musicians. You know, it would be Funkadelic and Al Green and Bobby Womack and the Last Poets. Like, that would be the same bill. Then the next week it would be like Rufus and Al Jarreau and New Birth, you know, and, you know, Bobby Blue Bland, you know. And he said, man, you mean the same people came to see all of those folks?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, we kind of forget that in that moment as well, just because of the way culture and music was really segregated. You know, it was like there was no such thing as like a crossover as an ideology in black music. I mean, some things, you know, there were 2 separate charts on Billboard. It's like, you know, one of the things I did kind of in prep for this talk was I went back and just looked at the Billboard chart from 72. And the thing that they used to do, and you know this because you used to work there, is that they give you one number for how high the number reached on the R&B charts, and there'd be another number for where the record went on the pop charts, and sometimes the disparity between things would be so wide. You know, there'd be something like, you know, James Brown's song would be #1, you know, on the R&B charts, and you know, never go higher than 57, you know, on the pop charts. So I mean, you know, or even, you know, like we forget that that you know, we really created our own star system, you know, inside the culture, so that, you know, that famous concert, historic concert where James Brown plays Boston, like somebody had to explain to the mayor of Boston who James Brown was at that point in time, just because of how segregated, you know, because of the kind of apartheid that existed culturally, you know.
But also what was happening, this was also just a change. When I was a kid, you had black radio stations, and as the radio stations, for example, take a song by Lead Belly, man, it was the song, "Good Night, Irene, I'll see you in my dream," but that's when they white-eyed it, but the original words are, "Good night, Irene, I'll get you in my dreams." But they would change it. So you listen to the black stations in Chicago, and everybody listened to those stations. First, that was the only stations we had, and so everybody was together. The dentist's wife and the sharecropper's wife. Everybody would show up at the same dance. So because there was only one dance, only one place to go, and that had a certain sense of community. Then, as there was a change, because they thought there were money in those hills. For example, exactly what he was saying, Motown was more trying to split the middle, and Stax was still funk. I remember the first record I ever bought, and it was on the radio, and it was a bow-legged woman. I just liked, you know, I want a bow-legged woman. My mama took the record and broke it up. How come, Ma? I like the drum part. I didn't know to put the other, you know what I mean? There are so many things that, for example, in Chicago, when many of the people of color came north, the guys couldn't work, and sometimes the ladies had to do some of the other work. That's why some of the songs, which we understood, said, "I hear you knocking, but you can't come in. I hear you." The guy's wife is in there with a customer, huh? But through all of that, there grew a solidarity, but that solidarity, of course, has been diluted multiple times now.
Yeah, I want to add something, another point that's important. 1972 is the beginning of the era of black FM radio. So you're having this explosion. You're having BLS here in the New York area. You had HUR in D.C. Howard. You had DAS in Philadelphia. LA was just having, in fact, one of the men, so when Jesse was doing I Am Somebody, on one side was Al Bell. On the other side of him was a man named Willie Davis, who had been a football player, became an excellent businessman, and owned one of the first black-owned radio stations in Los Angeles, which began around that time. So you also had the beginnings of black radio going from AM at the end of the dial to having FM with great fidelity, great sound quality, and you could listen to, like, everyone remembers, if those of you who are old enough like me, the golden days of BLS, where you might hear a great gospel show on the morning on Sunday playing everything. You'd hear real good jazz. Frankie Crocker might play whatever he wants to play. So the radio that we had, exactly, it was a beautiful time because the sound quality was better. You had the Isaac Hayeses and the Barry Whites and then the Gamblin' Huffs, the Slides, of course, but also Curtis Mayfield. So people were taking black music, expanding popular black music. I think it's also interesting when you look at this period of 72, going back to what, and Melvin kind of helped invent this, is the whole era of the black movie era, some call blaxploitation. But whatever you think of the movies overall, you had Curtis Mayfield doing soundtracks, and Marvin Gaye, and obviously Isaac Hayes. So people were doing big orchestrations with our music. It wasn't no longer the 2.5 minute or 3 minute record. There's a 5 minute and 7 minute record, in some cases the 8 minute or 9 minute record. And so it was a lot of creative ambition in the music. And I think this film, when you look back on it now, is at that nice moment where you see the old traditions and you see new things happening with black music.
Well, I think two things we have to acknowledge is that, you know, this is also the era of the liberation of the black musician in R&B, you know, because of the influence, the impact of Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone and James Brown. You know, we forget, or maybe, you know, I'm sure some of us don't, but, you know, they identified who the musicians were. You know, that would never happen in a Motown context. It was, you know, it was very much a kind of like, kind of star and backing band in the margin. Those guys were in the shadows and they were nameless. You know, I remember somebody told me, you know, because the British, when they really get into any kind of black music, I mean, they go scholarly on it. So the first time Motown played in London, people showed up at the airport and they wanted to get James Jameson's autograph. They wanted to get, you know, the Funk Brothers autographs, you know, because they wanted to know who was playing, you know, the music on this stuff, you know. And so that's where a lot of those new ideas came from. I mean, the reason James Brown hired Bootsy's band to replace his old band was because he knew they would bring some new ideas. He knew they would just, they were kind of bursting at the seams with new ideas because they had that energy that was a carryover from the impact that Hendrix in particular had on a younger generation of musicians. But the other thing to talk about too is that in terms of Melvin's work in film, in terms of Don Cornelius, you know, doing what he was able to do with Soul Train, Al Bell becoming, you know, the president, you know, of Stax. I mean, these were things that couldn't have happened in 1967 or 68. You know, you're really looking at a certain kind of harvest of a post-revolutionary moment, you know. And people don't think, you know, I think people think about our notion of a revolution as something that failed, but it's like when you have 100 cities in America go up in flames, you know, and the next day, you know, institutional America becomes open in a way it hadn't before. It's like, you know, King got civil rights, voting rights legislation passed, but, you know, the necessity of those things actually being, like, legally supported, you know, only became manifest once America really was kind of terrorized at the thought of what would happen, you know, if the black community, you know, was not able to kind of move towards a more democratic participation in the economy, politics, control. You know, this is the era when black mayors start to be elected. All of these, you know, all of these. So it's this way in which we move into institutional economic America in a way that's unprecedented because of, again, philosophy, politics, culture, you know, in a way they start to, like, kind of expand the space.
I'm forgetting one very important thing to mention about Los Angeles in 1972, and that is they just, within a year or two, they elected their first black mayor.
Yeah, Thomas Bradley.
Tom Bradley, who would be the mayor there for about 4 terms. Mm-hmm. And within that period, post-riot, this city right here, Ken Gibson, came right after the riots here.
Yeah. Coleman Young in Detroit.
Coleman Young in Detroit. Gary Hatcher, Indiana. Carl Stokes, Cleveland.
Yeah.
Washington was a little bit later.
Yeah, a little.
But I mean, but the momentum of black control of these cities is all post-riot because the white folks got scared, and black folks felt a lot. I mean, the organizational power. We felt like we had a chance to gain control, and we were actually there were black people starting to make enough money to coalesce with some of their white fellows who wanted to see change. And you began seeing from around this time, really all into the 80s, this movement of black mayors and black control in so many big cities, and Newark being obviously one of the bellwethers of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's people kind of carrying this movement consciousness, and people who are actually in the movement, made, these kind of media interventions possible. I mean, that was the thing. It was that, the people who organized the campaigns for those black mayors were movement people. I mean, people know this well here in Newark, certainly, So, I mean, Wattstax, really just represents like a kind of spectacular flowering of that, in terms of the platform it creates for the culture and the music. But, this is like a time of just like a lot of heady momentum, in all sectors of American, life, by a very kind of organized, forceful constituency of black folks, who have, clearly, again, have a lot of love and a lot of purpose, and direction, and motivation to use that energy in this very collective way.
Melvin, looking back, now, I don't know, you've seen the film a zillion times, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
What is it about, you have a lot of memories, but looking at it now, what's the legacy to you of that particular concert and of the film? What do you think the legacy of it is?
Well, you see, I look at the film and I have a little sadness. I love the film, but it was so good and so successful, but it's like all my work, people usually think it's going to fail. And when it makes it, everybody gets an attitude. When I say everybody, I'm not talking about black people. This was supposed to be just some jigaboos jumping around and last for an hour and a half. When they did a fantastic job, etc. When, even though my cops were sleeping in the corner, even though the karate guys couldn't get their way out of a paper bag, it was successful. It was successful. There had been no black company doing music work. When Sweetback worked, then Stax was able. Then we had these geniuses, musical geniuses, to get jobs, to do other things. There was one guy, and but outside of Quincy, it was impossible for you guys to do this kind of work. We'll take care of it from here. And to see the success of Wattstax 1 and how it was made sure that the next concert there was going to be trouble.
When was the next concert?
That was about 2 years later.
2 years later. And they did a similar thing, and there were problems with that one.
Yeah, there were a couple of murders and so forth. But when, slightly off the track, but when I made Sweetback, I promised 2 for 1. I promised the people that they could feel liberal by allowing me. And then number 2, have their racist theories vindicated by my failure. When I didn't fail, everybody got pissed off. I've never had an offer since that. I've had to do everything alone. And but what I see now is that we're breaking out of the that trap. We're not being caught anymore. We're not, our songs and our things are becoming more and more reality bound again, which is terrific. Not just about getting laid, which is terrific too, you know, but I mean, but about other things, other problems, other solutions. And I liked it.
So we have a time for some questions or comments. We have 2 microphones here. Anybody wants to say something, please come up.
Good evening, folks. One question. I noticed the Mary Baraka in the movie. I noticed Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee. Was there any effort to invite other African Americans at the time to attend the concert? Or they just bought tickets and attended?
I'm sorry.
He was wondering, he saw Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee in the crowd.
Mary Baraka also was in
Some
the crowd.
other, he's wondering,
I mean, leaders, I guess.
Well, was there any effort by the folks who put on the concert to invite other African American leaders from around the country? That was my question.
he's wondering if Al Bell and so on, did they make an effort to invite other African American leaders to the concert, aside from Jesse?
I have no idea. I know they've made other things, and Al, I saw Al recently. He's still working very hard on doing things, but he effed up. He succeeded, and that made things much harder. You were expected to at least to not win, and but Ozzie was terrific, and his wife is still keeping on. And you got to remember one thing, the most important thing. It's not how many times you get knocked down. It's how many times you get up. And
Anybody else
they're the
have any
best.
questions or comments? We have some time. It'd be great to hear people's reaction to the film.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. I would just like to know that being as though the Watts 7th Annual was such a success for the Los Angeles community as black people, do you feel like younger people now, black people now, have lost their way when it comes to coming together for rioting and for a cause? Do you feel they lost their way? Or it's not as strong as it used to be?
I don't want to sound like the voice of negativity, but I do feel like there has. I look at this film, and I saw Free Angela this week as well, and I've seen other films in that period, and I do wonder what has. I mean, a lot of things have happened, but there was a certain spirit of us moving forward as a community, despite, and there were differences, philosophical differences, but the idea was together in some form. I mean, it's a broad statement, but we feel very fragmented. We feel very disconnected. The loss, and one of the ironies of this era is that one of the big issues in all of our communities, be it Newark, I live in Brooklyn, is gentrification. And on one hand, gentrification is splintering and diluting our political power in traditional cities and traditional neighborhoods. On the other hand, at least in some of the cases, a lot of gentrification is driven by adult black people who've decided, I've had it with the big city, I'm selling my house and I'm getting out of here. I'm taking my Newark or New York money and moving back to Atlanta. My mother moved to Newport News from Brooklyn. This idea that we're getting out of these places that we came to, some of whom came to during this period of the film, and have had enough of the city life. So we have this really interesting thing going where sometimes we go, gentrification is negative, and it's having a negative impact up here, but it's having a ripple effect because it's somehow empowering certain black folks financially to leave. So you have this going on. So when I look around, I don't sense the sense of the urban community that generated hip hop, let's say. I don't see that energy around. I don't see that sense. That was another sense of community. That was another sense of urgency. For a moment there with hip hop, much like this moment, we had a political component. There was a return. There was an anti-apartheid movement, which was part of it. There was still an incipient black nationalism going on, and you had the creation of new forms of expression. A lot of it built on the music of the past. So the political movement of Wattstax then informs Chuck D, then informs the Bomb Squad and the music they're making. So there was a definite connection in the DNA of that period of hip hop to this movement. Right now, it feels very disconnected from any sense of history.
Well, I think it's important to realize that, you know, if you want to talk about that, you know, kind of the era when Public Enemy emerged, is that like those guys, you know, the Bomb Squad, I mean, and Chuck in particular, like, I mean, he went to a Panther school out on Long Island. So, you know, there's a continuity in terms of the transfer of knowledge from one generation to another that literally happened when he was like a very young, you know, young boy even, you know, and in the communities that a lot of those folks came out of, the KRS-Ones and the X-Clans and Brand New, I mean, a lot of these people came up in movement households too, so they kind of came up
Tupac,
with a certain,
Tupac comes up out of movement household.
I mean, you know, with a certain nationalist philosophy just being expressed and very evident in the world they came up in. And they, in their own way, as they moved into the music industry, you know what I mean, tried to deal with, you know, tried to balance all the contradictions between being in the American entertainment industry and trying to be a, you know, black political person, a community-minded person, you know. But, you know, what I find now, you know, because I do some teaching, is that, I mean, for younger people now, like the students I'm meeting who are kind of like in their late teens, early 20s, you know, you know, the most progressive of them are doing their homework now. You know, I mean, you know, they're reading, they're studying, they're talking to people who are movement vets. You know, those people are definitely, I mean, if you talk about SNCC people, they're definitely making themselves available. They're doing oral history projects. I mean, they're really leaving a documentation, you know. But there's a way in which that legacy of struggle for a lot of the younger people is very academic at this moment, you know what I mean? Like they're, you know, because it, you know, in terms of providing a continuity in terms of culture, we've been able to do that in places where the culture is very capitalized, like music and sports. But in terms of something like oppositional, grassroots politics, which, you know, by its very nature is going to be undercapitalized, younger people don't, you know, it's like they can't walk around their communities and, you know, kind of see a Panther office, you know, on the corner, or you know, see those, you know, as Baraka and Larry Neal and Askia Muhammad and all those folks were with the Black Arts Movement, like literally, like in the community, in the bars, you know, kind of spreading that gospel. So it's, you know, it's just a very, it's like young people have to kind of find their own way to that information now, you know.
It's interesting, too, because this is a time that seems to me ripe for political agitation. The stop and frisk thing is totally political. It's totally a philosophy that is politicizing and criminalizing young black people en masse. It also lays the groundwork for the removal of black people from areas, because it begins the process of taking young black men off the streets, makes gentrification a much more viable strategy. I live in Brooklyn. I've seen what's going on. I used to joke that there's no way to ever be, you know, they're never going to Brownsville or never going to East New York. Well, hey, they're on Ralph Avenue. So it is beginning to happen. So Bushwick is Soho now. So these things are all interconnected. There is a philosophy of policing that then leads into a philosophy of real estate that then leads into a changeover in the nature of our cities. And I use New York, but this is happening all over the country. So I'm really sad, because I feel like there's an opportunity for more political content within the popular culture. But we've reached a point where our biggest stars they identify themselves as corporations and not as black community members.
Yeah. But, you know, but I mean, I just think that, you know, we've had, you know, kind of in, you know, your lifetime and mine, like we've seen these rarefied moments when, you know, what people were doing in pop culture kind of mattered politically. But, I mean, really the history of the struggle, you know, if you want to go back to the 17th century, you know what I mean, it's always about what people who have nothing to do with being entertainers do. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, you know, it's people who feel, you know, on a plantation, it's time to revolt. You know what I mean? I just feel like you can't manufacture a movement. You know what I mean? There are these there's these moments when, and this is worldwide, it's like people just can't take it anymore, and they revolt, you know, they rebel.